Hello everybody, it's Colin Ellis here. It's Monday the 4th of April 2022 and welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast, which I'm delighted to say. I'm not sure whether I'm delighted to say. It makes it sound like I was really desperate to leave Australia, which I suppose after 2 years it's good to get away. But I'm recording this live in America. Which was a stress in itself, but anyway, I'll get the podcast isn't about that. Podcast is about how to build multicultural teams, but I will give an insight in how to get there. But I'm in Beverly Hills. I'm in a coffee shop called Bluebottle Coffee in Beverly Hills. My coffee is a pour over, and it's a Colombia Narino Yacuanquer. From Bluebottle Coffee on Beverly Boulevard. I'm just checking. Yeah, there we go. Beverly Boulevard West in Beverly Hills. So a quick sip of this coffee. And that's really nice. It's kind of dark stone fruit. Really nice. It's ever so slightly jet lagged. Not too bad. Could have been worse, but slightly jet lagged. It's a very weird thing, jet lag. You know that thing where the floor moves, or it feels like it is, and you feel like you're on shaky ground. I felt like that all my life, that I'm on shaky ground. It's got nothing to do with jet lag. So yes, here I am in America, and I think if I can pass on one tip, if you are planning to travel to America especially, is make sure that you plan it really well. And I mean, like the vaccination requirements and all of that, so print everything off, because it seems to me that they do everything up front. So the last time I was here, which was 2020, it was the last international trip I did, which was February 2020, is I felt like they did everything at Los Angeles airport. So, they checked all of the paperwork. You had to do the ESTA, the visa to work, everything was checked, all these questions. I feel like all of that happened at Melbourne Airport. So, all of the vaccination, we used the attestation form I uploaded everything, all the documentation there. So it was a bit of a breeze to get through. I mean, get through airports always takes time, but that didn't feel any different. But because I'd uploaded everything and we had everything printed out, that made way easier. So you just want to try and, I think with travel, because it's different now, because of COVID, because of the need for vaccine passports and all of that, there's a lot more stress than there used to be. So, my advice is to minimise it as much as possible. And interestingly, last week, actually the biggest stress of all, so in the US, there's a requirement to have a negative PCR test within 1 day of your flight. So I swear, it's like being on death row. And I'm over-dramatising it in the way that I often do, but it is, because, you want to pack, you want to get everything ready, but actually, there is also a chance that you just might not be going because the PCR test will come back. And for the family, we have been well for 2 years. I'm touching wood while I'm doing the all-over rule, touch wood, that means everything will be all right. We've been well for 2 years, then my son got a cold the day before we were due to take our PCR test. You've got to be joking. But anyway, as you can tell, we're here now. They all came back negative, but it was so stressful. And then as soon as we got the results, which was 5 o'clock the day before we were due to fly, not only was there wild celebration, but there was also immediate panic about all the things that we had to do. Anyway, someone said to me, is it not a bit of a risk to go anywhere else? I just want to see how other countries are doing COVID. We'll take all the precautions while we're here, as you do. What did Mark Zuckerberg say? The riskiest thing to do is to take no risks at all. Although the Cambridge Analytica scandal, kind of proved you can take it far too literally. Anyway, while I'm in America, I thought I'd talk about how to build multicultural teams. Over the last 2 years, I think one of the things about COVID and the pandemic, and you always try and look for positives. There have been so many negatives and continue to be, obviously, in the way that it affects people's lives, and I don't want to downplay that. Obviously, from my perspective, it meant there was a greater opportunity for remote work. So it's something that I've always done, is work with teams remotely. There wasn't that much of an appetite for organisations to do it. But the pandemic really changed all of that. So all of a sudden I was working with companies all over the US and in Europe as well, which was which was really interesting because what I had to do was to really learn the different cultures that I was working with before I actually went to the workshops, because it's one of those things that we make an assumption that every culture is like ours, and it's not. Now, I had experience of this in 2017. I worked with an insurance company in Asia in 2017-18, and ended up delivering in like 13 countries. It was something crazy like that. I was in Japan, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. So many countries. I'm sure I've missed a few out there as well, because that definitely wasn't 13. I missed a few out there. And one of the things that I did prior to that was I researched the different social cultures. And I remember reading Erin Mayer's book, which I highly recommend, by the way. If you work with multicultural teams, or if you want to work with multicultural teams, or if you're just interested in how social cultures are different, Erin Mayer's book is excellent. It's called The Culture Map. And what I like about it is it's accessible, for regular listeners of the podcast. I like the books that make stuff easy to understand. Not that necessarily that we're all dumb. I was speaking personally. I just like it when kind of what could potentially be complex subjects are made easy. Now Erin Mayer's work is built on that of Gerd Hofstede's work in the Hofstede, I think it's Hofstede, he's Dutch, in the 1960s and 70s. So he came up with this framework for cross-cultural communication called, if you want to search for it on Wikipedia, it's called Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions. And it's something that when I read Erin Mayer's book, I became fascinated by, because communication is something that I teach as part of my culture workshops. And so I wanted to incorporate Hofstede's work such that if you've got people from different social backgrounds working on your team, you gain this understanding of how we all do communication differently. And so I just thought I'd share some of this on the podcast with you, but I would urge you to go and, kind of seek out Gerd Hofstede, Hofstede, Gerd Hofstede's work and his cultural dimensions, or grab a copy of Erin Mayer's book, The Culture Map, which is really, really good. But anyway, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you the 5 cultural dimensions from Hofstede's work, and then kind of talk to you about how this applies within a work context. And kind of when I teach this, people are like, oh wow, it makes so much sense, which is credit to Hofstede for doing the research, obviously. But I think we should I've long said that we should teach kids about communication. We should teach kids not only about kind of cultural heritage. So, my kids are learning a lot about First Nations people and Aboriginal, the challenges they face, which I think is fabulous. But also about how to kind of build relationships with people from other cultures. Melbourne as a city, and definitely here in Los Angeles, it's highly multicultural. I think these are skills for life that we can give our children. Anyway, here's the 5 dimensions. The first one is called the Power Distance Index. So this is about how equally power, I'm doing my air quotes here, which is so LA, how equally power is distributed. So in a work context, this is really all about empowerment and trust. And obviously empowerment and trust works differently in different countries. So Erin Mayer in her book, The Culture Map, she talks about these two leadership styles being egalitarian and hierarchical. So in an egalitarian leadership style, the kind of distance between the boss and kind of someone who reports to the boss or subordinate is low. So in those instances, kind of we empower people, we give lots of trust. So, a good example of an egalitarian culture is places like Australia and the UK. That's why it made the transition for me so much easier, because the UK is an egalitarian culture, same as Australia, places like Holland, Denmark, Canada, Sweden, places like this. So kind of high trust, high empowerment, whereas hierarchical the distance between the boss and the subordinate is lower. So the boss will regularly will check in way more often than they would in an egalitarian culture. So hierarchical cultures, so Japan, Korea, India, Russia, the Emirates. So that's the first thing to take into consideration, is that power distance, kind of index. So when you're working with someone from another culture, is almost ask yourself the question, how do they like to be managed? So I know when I did my training course in Japan, obviously not only was there the language barrier, I had two interpreters. I'll tell you a very quick story. So they said, obviously being from the UK, I'm tall, I'm 6'2", I dress really smartly, and they talked to me about how that would be perceived in Japan and the things to say to build trust. And so I was pretty nervous, right? I was speaking to like 120 managers, senior managers across this insurance business, who'd all come to hear me talk. And we'd had my slide deck was translated, so it was all in Japanese and all that kind of stuff, which was such a great experience. And I opened by saying that I was from Liverpool because I know Liverpool as a city. It's because of the Beatles, particularly. Japan has got this strong linkage to the Beatles. And so my nerves got the better of me, and I said, introduce myself slowly. I spoke slowly, which is hard for me, as you can tell. I said I was from Liverpool, and then sang a Beatles song, karaoke, in front of a room full of 120 managers. I was like, I said, hands up, who knows the Beatles? So immediately went against everything that they said about keep it low key, don't ask for large group interaction. Who knows the Beatles? And get people to put their hand up. And then I started singing Hey Jude. So that's my Japan story. So yes, that's the first thing, the power distance. I better crack on here. I'll be here all day. This is what. See, I've had my coffee now. I've got a second wind. The jet lag's wearing off. So the second thing is individualism versus collectivism. So this is about, from a work context, is kind of how teams organize themselves and how people consider their contribution. And so this is where kind of preferred work style is a preferred work style about the individual or the group, and then it's about integration and kind of helping people with that. Now the Australian way of working is we've got a very social culture. Everyone's mate, everyone's doll, surfing, barb, shrimps on the barbie, all of that, right? Which are all cliches about the Australian way of life, but it's very social culture. And so we're all about collectivism. And so when we're working with other, I'm speaking for the whole of Australia. So when kind of Australians go to Japan, a country like Japan, where it's very individualistic, they find it very difficult. They find it very difficult to kind of draw people out into those group environments. So again, it's that understanding of these different group working styles. The third thing is uncertainty avoidance. So this is the tolerance for ambiguity. So in a work context, it's how good is the group with or without context. So I've used the word context far too many times in that sentence. But do they want more? Do they need more information to get started or less? I remember when I was working with the development team in India, when I was a senior manager in government in New Zealand, they wanted lots and lots of context, and my boss at the time couldn't understand. He was frustrated by a lack of initiative, and obviously I'd read Hofstede's work by this point because I'd done lots of work with teams overseas, and I had to explain to him that kind of that ambiguity. And again, it's not true of every individual, but in a group context, not group with ambiguity. So what you have to do is be really, really specific up front about what your expectations are, where to get information, how you want it to be reported back. But especially about that context, you have to give as much as you can. The fourth thing is masculinity versus femininity. This is what Hofstede found in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, our views of gender have moved on since. But again, just in relation to Hofstede's work, so he found that masculinity is defined as kind of a preference that we have in society for things like heroism, achievements, rewards, trophies, whereas feminism is a preference for cooperation, modesty, work-life balance, so those kinds of things, almost that kind of difference between more action-oriented versus more people-oriented. Now, certainly in the 60s and 70s, I think work was, and definitely when I started work in the 80s, it was definitely more action-oriented. It was all about goals, I mentioned before the kind of Wall Street, the movie Wall Street, which was in the late 90s, where the main character, Michael Douglas, said greed, for want of a better word, is good. And that was the way in the 90s, and obviously it kind of eventually led to the housing boom and the stock market crash. We also had the crash in the dot-com boom as well, because it was all about greed and material needs. Not everybody, but that's generally what society was about. I think that's flipped, and I wrote an article, I wrote a blog recently about purpose and how the world is more purpose-focused. And I asked the question, is your organisation purpose-led or purpose-lazy? And I think most organisations want to become more purpose-led, which really expresses a preference for the femininity angle here. And I think we've downplayed the importance of that for far too long. It has been about heroism and achievement and, kind of indispensable employees, rather than creating great cultures where all people can flourish. So that's the fourth thing. And then the last thing is long-term versus short-term orientation. So this is the connection of the past. So what have we learned from the past in relation to what we've got to do in the future? So when there's a lower degree of this particular index, then traditions are honoured, traditions are kept, and that real steadfastness is valued. Those with a high degree in this index, so it's more of a long-term approach, then adaptation, pragmatic problem solving as a necessity. So this is really about flexibility and agility. So how much are we going to hold on to what's gone before in order to create something for the future? I always feel that there's a kind of happy medium here between finding a good balance where you are flexible and agile around the future, but it's built on the traditions of the past and what's gone before. And so we learn those lessons and we capture what works well, but we're also agile and flexible about what's worked in the future. And so I think, understanding those dimensions, if you're a manager of a multicultural team, what you've got to do is find a balance between the not only the different personalities, but also the different social cultures. So some very, very simple things to do is to get people to talk about, and this is what we used to do. I remember I flew a team over from India when I was in New Zealand. My boss did not want to do it, but we had a big program of work to deliver. And I absolutely insisted, against all odds, that we had to fly the development team over from India. And they were like, why? We don't understand. Why can't we just do conference calls? I'm like, because that's not how you build a team. How we build a team is we understand where people are from, we understand where people's backgrounds, we create conversations around that, we capture what's celebrated, we capture what the social norms are, so that we're not making an assumption, also that we're not force-feeding other people our social cultures. And so if you're a manager listening to this, you've got a multicultural team, is you need to create an environment where people talk about their social culture, talk about what's important, talk about how they like to receive, how they like to process information. Talk about things like trust and empowerment. Ask people what they need from you in order for them to be able to do their best work. you know, communication is a term that we throw away. When you're good at communication, there's a real recognition that not only can you talk human to human, but you can also talk country to country. So you have that appreciation that, yes, we're all different as humans, but we've also got different backgrounds. You know, and you know, one of the quotes I like from, I hope I get it right when I quote this, Erin, if you're listening, I'm sorry, is she said, in today's business environment, it's not enough to be hierarchical or egalitarian. You have to be both. You have to have an appreciation of different people's cultures, different communication mechanisms. You have to have an appreciation of the things that people celebrate and what they stand for in their social cultures, as well as understanding their personality. All right, it is, what time is it here now? It is 2 p.m. on Sunday, Los Angeles time, and I think it's 7 a.m. Melbourne time. So if you're listening in Australia, I hope you have a fabulous Monday. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a fabulous rest of the weekend, or whenever you listen to this. And look forward to talking to you soon. Okay, ta-ra for now.